that?
St. Francis.
That is St. Francis. Yes.
Yep.
Because St. Francis is just such an emblem of compassion. So we have graphic designers at the cathedral, and this is what they chose for our image. So I take no credit for that.
Is that from Santa Fe?
I would assume it's from the cathedral.
Is it? Yeah. I would think so. Sure.
Yeah, pretty much everything that they use graphically is from the
Mhm.
cathedral because we have such a wealth of stonework and stained glass and paintings, all of that. So kind of um our kind of main quote for tonight is if you are continually judging and criticizing yourself while trying to be kind to others, you're drawing artificial boundaries and distinctions that only lead to feelings of separation and anxiety. And we're going to talk more about that separation and isolation. I apologize. Um, so tonight we're pulling in a new book called Self-Compassion. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. This is by Kristen Neff, who's one of the leading researchers in self-compassion. And so this is really huge. If we're not showing compassion to ourselves, then how do we show it well to others? So we
Mhm.
will start with a practice, and this is one that focuses on the inner child. And I would hear people talk about their inner child, and I would struggle with that because it felt so artificial. I don't know, it always felt weird to me until I did this practice. And then once I started doing this practice, it kind of made sense. So, self-compassion can be tough for us because many of us have convinced ourselves or have had the example set for us that we have to be harsh and criticize ourselves to improve. And if we're kind, then we're just too soft. And especially generationally, this has been passed on. This is the narrative that's been passed on. In addition, we've lived with ourselves for so long that we tend to relate to ourselves fairly unconsciously. So we've habituated a relationship with ourselves in which we regularly wound ourselves. And you might notice we talk to ourselves much more harshly than we talk to anyone else. So if we've encountered a mistake or a difficulty, those inner voices come out. But in this practice, we're going to create a new way of relating to ourselves and make a loving connection to ourselves and have that no matter how much we've messed up. So I invite you to start by letting your eyes soften or close. Feel free to just relax your whole body. Allow your shoulders to melt down the sides of your body. See if you can release the tension in your jaw, around your eyes, and across your forehead. Feel yourself supported and relaxed. Allow your body to ground you in this moment. Allow it to give you strength to open to what God has in store for you today. I invite you to move your hand to your heart space. Melt your heart. You can even put your hands on your heart if that helps. Allow your heart to feel soft and warm. Be receptive in your heart. Let it open to feelings and let those feelings Settle into a warm acceptance with whatever is arising. Now welcome in compassion and let it soften your heart even more. Take a couple of breaths, but visualize your breath coming in and out of your heart. Quiet your thoughts and allow your head to be spacious and to remain in the present moment. Open your mind to be curious in this moment. With your body grounded and your heart engaged and your mind curious, think of a child you have known or know now and love completely. Bring the face of that child to mind. Picture that child's face and expression. Feel a deep connection to this child. Imagine this child comes to you and starts to talk about what hard day they've had. Notice your reaction to their struggle. You might lean in. You might give a gentle touch or a snuggle. You use your most soothing voice. You don't expect them to be superhuman. It can be hard being a little kid. Notice the amount of empathy you have for them. Open your heart to this vulnerable child and sense the connection you have with them. Now allow the image of that child to dissolve away, and I want you to picture yourself as a little child. Perhaps there's a favorite picture of yourself that you can use to bring your face to mind. Really look at your little face. Look into your young eyes. What have you been through up to this point? Maybe you've been disappointed, ignored. Have you received harsh criticism from some people? Have you been confused? See if you can connect your heart to your child self and let them know that you understand. Bring your empathy to your child self. See if you can communicate your empathy to them now. Let them know that they will be okay, even many years later. They will be okay. Sit with your child self for a while in silence, with your hearts connecting, with love flowing between you. As we close, sense that this compassion and love are available to you at all times. Amen. So as we move into this week's reflection and topic, I'm curious, When did you experience compassion this past week? Were you able to give compassion to someone else or receive it for yourself? And feel free, you can either put it into the chat or if you want to raise your hand to speak to the whole group. When did you experience compassion? All right, Teresa.
Firstly, I don't quite know how to address you. Is it Reverend or Mother?
You can just call me Joe, that's fine.
Joe. Okay, Joe. Hello to you all. This is my first time at this particular class. I've only heard of you since Saturday, and already I've attended the beautiful service on Sunday and coffee hour, and I'm very, very grateful to be here. This particular topic makes me think it was the hand of God that brought me here. As it turns out, I'm a person with chronic pain. It's a condition I've had for over 35 years from my back.
Mm.
And on Monday, my chronic pain group decided to pick up this self-compassion workbook by Kristen.
Yes.
And I've just started attending that particular class, but they've just completed the entire book you're now referencing, the first self-compassion book.
Right.
And at that meeting, it was a revelation, just like this is, about the shame or the anxiety that we feel and we don't know how to express, oftentimes don't even know how to get in touch with. And the class dealing with people with chronic pain, it was done like different people spoke,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then there'd be some mild crosstalk. So there was giving and receiving, and it was quite healing because we're all adults, some of us seniors like myself.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that we need to learn how to love ourselves is quite an experience.
It
This
is.
is only going to be a compliment. And again, thank you for allowing me to come.
Well, we're glad you're here, Teresa. And you're not the only one here who struggles with chronic pain or chronic illness. It's a reality for a lot of folks, I know.
Okay.
Barb.
There's a young man that's a grandson to the lady that brought me here to Tennessee. And I don't live with them. But anyway, he was so sad because his father lost his job. And I just had some, major compassion for him because I he doesn't have the how can I say, so many kids have ballet classes and they play football, basketball, all of those things, and they don't, and I mean, they do have bikes, that's good, but it's not that. And I just felt so badly for him and his father. So, and I showed him, I hugged him. Okay.
Wonderful. Because we talked about compassion as taking that next step into action. And so you showed that. Wonderful. Autumn wrote in the chat, compassion came during the hurricane with all the people checking in. It warmed her heart. Nancy says, love, cuddles, and quiet talks with my 9-year-old granddaughter who had her tonsils out last week. Oh,
Oh.
a certificate for the No Tonsils Club. I love that. I love that. You know, I was thinking about this Sunday, that we can have hard conversations, but if we're not in connection with each other, then without that connection, we can't have compassion. Um, so that's just something to keep in mind as we're thinking about compassion, that it really does come from a connection. We'll actually talk about that a little bit more. Beryl said she was visited by a young lady who's battling breast cancer. oh, about to start Red Devil treatments and full of compassion because another friend had just finished that and know how devastating. Oh, yeah. And Michelle says, compassion came to me from an online cancer support group. We connect, share. Oh, that's wonderful, Michelle. Lucia um, said she's reached out several times to a Jewish friend who's been so pained by the situation in the Middle East and says, I'm on her only friend who checks in. Thank you for that. That's a really helpful word for all of us who might have Jewish friends and Palestinian friends. We have some Palestinian friends here in town also. And and it is that simple. It is that simple of just checking in, as Autumn shared and others. It can be that simple. So thank you all for sharing these stories of compassion. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so this is Rabbi Albert Friedlander, and his story came from one of my big collections of books here. This is the 12 Steps to Compassionate Life, and she tells his story. This is Karen Armstrong. Um, she got to meet him. He emigrated to the United States during World War II as a Jew who was living in Nazi Germany. And when he had been living there, he heard all the messages that the Nazis said about Jews, all the horrible things, um, the anti-Semitic propaganda that was assailed him from all sides. And so one night when he was 8 years old, he deliberately lay awake and made a list of all of his good qualities. He told himself that he was not what the Nazis said, and that he had talents and special gifts of heart and mind, which he enumerated to himself one by one. Finally, he vowed that if he survived, he would use those qualities to build a better world. And he did. He was involved in a lot of post-World War II interfaith dialogues, was very involved with the Christian church and building bridges between the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. So I just love that in response to the world saying, or obviously the Nazis saying, you are little and less than and not even human, he said no. And here I'm going to write it out. So that is just a really powerful reminder of ways that we can stand up. And now I want to tell you the story of the Golden Buddha. I had never heard this story until now I'm pulling out another book. It's the night of all the books. Till I read this book, Radical Compassion. And the story of the Golden Buddha comes to us from Thailand. There was once a temple in Thailand, and in the 50s, they were building a highway and it needed to go straight through the temple. So the monks who lived there had to pick everything up and relocate to another place in the city. And they hired this giant crane because they had this solid clay Buddha. And it was very, very heavy. And so they needed this machinery to move the clay Buddha. Well, the crane picks up the Buddha and it cracks. Well, the rabbis didn't know what to do, so they lowered it back to the ground. They covered it with a tarp because it was about to rain, and everyone went home for the night. So one of the head, I think I said rabbi, and I meant to say the I'm sorry, the monks. So the head monk came back and he brought his flashlight. And that evening, he began to shine his flashlight into all of the cracks of the statue. And what he noticed is when he shined the flashlight into the cracks, something was reflected back at him.
Oh,
So he went and he told all of the other monks, and they came back with hammers and chisels and started to chip away at the stone in the cracks. And slowly but surely, they revealed this amazing golden Buddha that was trapped under the clay.
mhm.
Well, it turns out that historians believe that several hundred years earlier, the temple monks themselves had covered the statue with clay. Anticipating an attack by a neighboring army, they hoped to protect their most precious Buddha from being looted or destroyed. But the monks were all killed in the battle, so no one knew
Oh,
this
Mm.
Buddha that they had covered in clay was actually solid gold. And I'm pretty sure this is the largest solid gold Buddha in the world. So I'm telling you this story because this is what happens to us. We are all solid gold on the inside, but over time, we have built up layers of clay to protect ourselves from the world, but that also hides the golden side of ourselves and prevents that from shining out. So, if we look to Thomas Merton or Richard Rohr, this is another way of saying our true self or false self, if you know that language. We don't have time to get into all of that language, but think of the inner self as your golden Buddha, and we have covered ourselves with this clay that hides us. So, practicing self-compassion helps us get in touch with the golden Buddha that is inside. So, turning back to Kristen Neff, she says we have three core components to self-compassion. One is self-kindness, that we be gentle and understanding with ourselves rather than harshly critical and judgmental. Two, that we have recognition of our common humanity, feeling connected with others in the experience of life rather than feeling isolated and alienated by our suffering. This goes back to that opening quote that I shared. And finally, mindfulness, that we hold our experience in balanced awareness rather than ignoring our pain or exaggerating it. Because it's easy to swing from one side of the continuum to the other, but finding that space in the middle. So, turning to self-kindness. Society teaches that strong individuals should be stoic and silent toward their own suffering. And as I mentioned, this is very generational. Um, the further you get away, we think about the greatest generation. There was a lot of stoicism and silence towards suffering. Stoicism isn't all bad. If you get to actually the heart of Stoicism, there's a lot of intersection here. But the way that we interpret being stoic, as in, I'm not going to acknowledge what's happening, that is not helpful. Self-kindness means that we stop the constant self-judgment and disparaging internal commentary. That's hard. It requires us to understand our foibles and failures instead of condemning them. But it's more than stopping self-judgment. It involves actively comforting ourselves, responding just as we would to a dear friend in need. So we have a posture of self-kindness. So I invite you, when we did this at the beginning, to put your hands over your heart, to pause and feel the warmth and the touch of your hands. This is a gesture of self-kindness, of being there for ourselves. I'm going to stop sharing and touch on another practice. So one of the quotes that I shared was, yes, we have to stop the self-judgment, the negative talk that's in our heads, but we have to take that next step and show ourselves that next level of kindness. And Kristen Neff talks a lot about giving ourselves loving touches. And it's literally, try this with me. It feels a little strange. You can either give yourself a hug, but whatever touch is comforting to yourself, sometimes it's just stroking your arm. I taught this class in February of 2023. And then I went away to a conference and I gave a presentation. And I know that, we always know we can't appeal to everyone. Most of the people in my class appreciated what I had to say. There was one person who didn't, and I got this really scathing review. And I was reading it in the airport, and I had that intense feeling of your stomach dropping out and you just want to curl in on yourself. And so I found myself curling in on myself and I found my arms coming up like this. And I started doing the soothing self-touch and it made a difference. It didn't make it all go away, but it made a difference. So I just offer that to you that if you practice this, and it could be soothing self-touch like this, as silly as it sounds, stuffed animals make a big difference. One of the reasons my family loves to go to IKEA so much is because we love IKEA stuffed animals. Uh, they have a giant shark that we had bought a family shark, and it turned out that my son just really needed that shark, so we had to buy a second shark
Oh.
so that we could have a family shark. And it sits on our couch, and people go and find it when they've had a bad day, and they snuggle up with this shark, and we have a bear, and we snuggle up with these stuffed animals because it's that soothing. And that's what helps us to self-soothe and to give ourselves self-compassion. So whether it's a hand over your heart to remember what is there or soothing self-touch, but be thinking of the ways that you give yourself comfort. Maybe it's making a cup of tea. But there are so many ways, but it's finding what works for you. But touch is actually a very important way that we do this. So finding our common humanity, we touched on this before, that this pulls us out of the isolation. Um, so what does it mean when we say we're only human to yourself or to someone else? What does that mean to you? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. Have you ever said that to anyone? Maybe in consolation. Don't be too hard on yourself, making an excuse for a mistake. We're not perfect, that it's okay to make mistakes. You're allowed to be imperfect. No, nobody's perfect. I like that. No need to be perfect. Exactly. So if we're willing to say to someone else when they have made a mistake and say, we're only human, we can't be perfect. Why can't we say that to ourselves? I think of everyone can make mistakes. Yes. We mess up all the time. And sometimes it impacts us in big ways and sometimes in small ways. But if the people around us are willing to say, it's okay, we're only human, we want to turn that back on ourselves as well. So from radical compassion, feeling unworthy goes hand in hand with feeling separate from others and separate from life. If we're defective, how can we possibly belong? And it seems like a vicious cycle. The more deficient we feel, the more separate and vulnerable we feel. And it is easy to get trapped in that cycle. And so we have to find this common humanity to bring us back together. So one of the saddest consequences of social comparison is how we distance ourselves from people's whose success makes us feel bad about ourselves. Before coming to the cathedral, I ran my own business, and it was a micro business. It was very, very small. And but I had peers who were in the same space and they were a few years ahead of me. And I saw what their businesses were doing, what their teams of people were doing. And I always felt like I was comparing myself from them. And I would just feel so, so bad. Like, why am I not doing what they're doing? Well, number one, I haven't been doing it as long. And number two, I don't have a team of people that they do. I'm just me. And, they're in their space and I'm in mine, and it's okay. Um, but we compare ourselves. We are always in this comparison, and it's been drilled into us that we all have to be unique and special, and everyone has to be better than. So we're always looking for the ways that we're better than someone, but that creates that distance. It creates the distance whether we think we're better than them or we think we're worse than them, there's still distance. So when our sense of self-worth and belonging is grounded in simply being human, we can't be rejected or cast out by others. The very fact that we are imperfect affirms that we are card-carrying members of the human race and therefore always automatically connected to the whole. We talked about that in the Brene Brown class last month, that we're always connected, that the default is belonging, and we always belong to each other. And it's a matter of recognizing that. So again, these are from Kristen F. And then oh, that's right. We're getting to the posture of common humanity. So this is just holding your arms out like you're giving a big air hug. This is the gesture for common humanity, giving and receiving love, embracing others and not self-focused. So, if showing self-kindness, this is this inward move. Now we have this outward move. Our hearts are wide open and ready to send that love out and to receive love in. So that's our posture of common humanity. And then finally, oh, we have something in the chat. Oh, and Susan, I missed your comment earlier that I'm not perfect. You're a good person no matter. That's a great way to put it. And Autumn said, someone told me that we could measure our strength by the strong people we surround ourselves with. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So being mindful. So kindness refers to the clear seeing and non-judgmental acceptance of what's occurring in the present moment. So that's, I think I wrote the wrong word there. I think that's supposed to be mindfulness, not kindness. I apologize. It's supposed to be mindfulness refers to the clear seeing and non-judgmental acceptance. To give ourselves compassion, we first have to recognize that we're suffering. We can't heal what we can't feel. So often what we do, that stoic sense, we tamp down feelings. We refuse to feel them. And by not feeling them, we don't have to deal with them. But we can't heal them if we don't acknowledge them. And we're suffering regardless. When our self-concept is threatened, we can over-identify or overreact. So it's this big swing in emotions. So when our sense of self is threatened, then we might have this over-the-top reaction it is not equivocal to the situation at hand. I dabble in photography. I have a lot of fun. I'm nowhere near the level of the Cathedral photographers, but a local friend invited me to come and to take photos at her son's bar mitzvah a few years ago here in Cleveland. And so I was taking pictures, and she said that she had received permission that I could take the picture. So I was trying to be as unobtrusive as possible, as over in the corner. But I think there was some miscommunication. And at one point, one of the rabbis came up to me and asked me, he was a little grumpy, like, you can't take these pictures. What I should have done was just say, Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I had permission. I'll just move back to my seat now. What actually happened was I had this overblown reaction because I felt like I was important. I was going to be letting my friend down if I didn't take these pictures. And I just had this huge wash of shame.
Oh,
Didn't really do much. I mean, I was not hurting anyone. I was just taking pictures and they asked me to stop. But I had this overblown reaction, uh, started crying. This was in mask wearing days. It was very messy. Uh, but I was really threatened on the inside. And so I had this big overreaction. My reaction was disproportionate to the situation at hand. And I definitely tried to do the mindful and the self-compassion practices, and they kind of worked, but it was
really?
sometimes it just happens. You gotta go through it. So what we can do in those times is focus that we're having these thoughts and feelings, and not get lost in the storyline of, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person because the rabbi had to come in the middle of the service and ask me to stop taking pictures. No, I'm having feelings that I felt embarrassed and a little ashamed that I was disrupting the service this way, even if I didn't mean to. But to take that step back, to take an outsider's perspective, the more that we can move emotions from deep within them to outside of us, the more that we can hold them up and deal with them. So, if you are in a situation, and I try to do this, if I get very upset, um, I might start saying, I'm mad. I am so mad right now, and just kind of stomping around and saying, I am mad. Then the next step to pull it one step out is you take it out and you say, I feel mad. I have feelings of being mad. And that takes it one step out. And then there was madness or anger. Anger is probably a better way to say that. There was anger. I experienced anger. So the more we pull it out, the more we're able to be mindful with it, to observe it from this third person perspective, and to deal with it in a much more balanced way rather than this overreactive way. Because mindfulness is one of the core components of self-compassion, when we improve our mindfulness skills, we automatically increase our ability to be self-compassionate. And that just blows my mind. I loved reading that. I love sharing that with you because mindfulness is something that we can all do pretty much anytime, anywhere. It's simply being present in the present moment and being aware of what's happening. And we've done so many mindfulness practices throughout our time, and we'll continue to do them. So our posture of mindfulness is to open our hands, and I'm holding mine up really high so you can see them, but let them face the ceiling. So the metaphorical gesture for mindfulness. It's a feeling when we stop resisting life and open to what is. There's a feeling of spaciousness that wasn't present before. We often use this posture when praying the Lord's Prayer at the cathedral. I don't know if you've noticed the clergy do that. They'll use this posture because it's an openness and a willingness to receive. So I have talked a lot tonight. I got too excited and I had too many things to say. Um, But I want to talk about turning toward love because that's what we're really doing here. The more that we can turn toward love when we become aware of feeling lonely, depressed, anxious, caught in this self-judgment or blaming. And I want you to try different ways to reconnect with love. So I'll give you some options, but the more often we do this intentional turn toward love, expressing it and letting it in, the more your natural care and compassion will arise spontaneously through the day. So I'm going to stop our share and find. There we go. So before I start sharing, I'm curious, how do you think of turning towards love? What are there any practices? And I'm talking simple practices, whether it's going outside and absorbing sunlight to warm yourself. But what might you think of to turn towards love and welcome that love in? Teresa.
Oh, for me, because I'm in bed so much, I find gratitude
Mm,
Mm.
for
yes, thank
the simplest,
you.
beautiful things in a day. If I can get up and put the coffee pot on, the aroma,
Mm,
I'll just stand there and let the aroma just circulate in the room and say, thank you, Jesus. Everything and anything can bring gratitude into my heart because you spend so much time in silence and solitude.
Yeah.
yeah.
I learned not to let it be isolation, but rather to make it be a contemplative silence,
Mm.
so that life can speak to me on its own terms, and not me impose the terms on my life. So for me, gratitude. Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you. Any other thoughts of how you might let love in? Roxanne.
Well, thank you, Teresa, because I'm by myself a lot too. And I beat myself up. I do that. And I know that. So, but I'm in some group therapy right now. And so they always ask what you did since the last time. So I'll say, well, Sunday I went to see my church at Indianapolis, their service, and then I went and watched the cathedral, and then I had the coffee hour, and she said, your eyes just light up when you start talking about that coffee hour. And I said, yes, I get a lot of comfort out of that coffee hour because there's so much compassion showed to everyone in that group. And so, yeah, I need to try to remember that
Mm,
when I'm by myself and sometimes feeling sorry for myself.
yeah. Thank you, Roxanne. In the chat, we have Autumn says she snuggles with her dog to feel her heartbeat and her contentment in my touch. That's wonderful. Smiling and hugging. Kathleen takes a walk in the woods for forest bathing. That's a great thing. Tish says going into the garden or experiencing nature. Yes, these are all wonderful ways to begin to let love in. So from our book, I think it can be whatever works for you, but I'll give you some of the suggestions. Oh, Beryl says cat purring, and Marjorie, walk on the beach when you're able. It's full of peace. Yes, it is. I even um I even have videos from when I've been to the beach that I'll pull up on my phone because I'm not close to a beach. So even that can help to
Mm.
give this sense of expansiveness. So sending yourself a caring message. Things like, may I be happy? May I be safe? It's okay, sweetheart. One of the things that Kristen Neff recommends is giving yourself a pet name. What do you call yourself? What do you call yourself in love? Whether it's sweetheart, darling. I mean, those are kind of the old school kind of lovey names, but what do you call yourself in love? And making sure that you do that. Um, may I love myself into healing. That's a Tara Brach thing. Um, so you can imagine receiving a caring note from a loved one or a friend or a compassionate spiritual figure. We talked about putting hands on heart, hugging yourself. You could do a comforting hand on your cheek, or even putting your hands together in prayer. So similar to what we were talking about going out into the garden and nature and the woods and the beach. But if you can't get out, imagine yourself being surrounded and held in warm light. Maybe you light a candle, whether that's an actual flame or an electric candle, but having that light, that glow to surround you. Imagine yourself being embraced by a loved one or a compassionate spiritual figure, or embracing your inner child. That's why we did that inner child meditation, is so that we can get in touch with that sweet self that we have, that golden Buddha inside of us. Imagine and feel what it's like to let in love. And you can visualize the eyes of a loved one who is feeling and expressing his or her care, and then allowing that to wash over you. And you can also send your love and your care to the others in your life and those that you don't even know. So you can do this through a message or an image. You can do this. There's one of the, actually, we'll talk about that next week. It's a practice for loving our neighbor. So we'll talk about that next week. So those are just some of the ways that we can let love in, but be creative. There's no wrong way to let love in if it's letting love in. And only you can be the judge of that. But there really is no wrong way to do that. Thoughts before we go on to our next thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the idea of the image of God and what it means that we're made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be helpful in um, focusing on how to love ourselves and what's good in ourselves. I'm not sure I can get real far with it, but I think I think of God as being the embodiment of love. Of course, God
Mm-hmm.
is creative. God has intelligence. We're made in the image of God. We're not God, so we have to be careful about the focusing on self kind of thing. Um, but it can be helpful in rebuilding a damaged sense of self or building a healthy sense of self. But it seems to me to be a deep and interesting concept.
It is. So if we think to Jesus's baptism, when the heavens open up and a dove comes down, and I'm not going to remember which gospel it's in. In one gospel, it is, "This is my son, the beloved." But in another gospel, it's, "You are my son. You are beloved." And we hear that again, again, and again in the Bible, how we are God's beloved. So that if we are created in the Imago Dei, created and called good at the very beginning, then we can take that with us and bring in this sense of being God's beloved. Oh, thank you, Barbara, for that explanation. I didn't understand before. This was in the chat. I had asked what you call yourself, and Barbara gave her Polish nickname. So we haven't talked a whole lot about self-talk, and that is something that takes a lot of work. Um, Thinking about how we stop those the talk of judgment. This is like a very common thing. If you have this voice, this inner critic that's constantly narrating everything that you're doing wrong. There are some people, if we look at our Enneagram types, there are some people on the Enneagram who tend towards this much more than others, but it can happen to all of us, that we have this constant narrator of, "Oh, you screwed up again. Oh, you did that wrong. This wasn't good enough." And so it's doing these practices and interrupting and saying, "I recognize that those are my thoughts, but they're not accurate. They do not define what is actually happening." So, and then to pull in one of our practices to let love in and say, no, I am whole and I am worthy. I am beloved by God and I'm a child of God. So Carrie said she's struggling with this topic. Maybe I think that says, um, okay, one other thing, and there's so many, um, uh, one other thing about self-compassion is it can really be, it can hurt and be tender. I don't know if you all remember last week when I shared after that first week's class, I got super grumpy at the nicest person in the world. And it was because my heart was so tender. What can happen is as we start to do this work, as we break open, Kristen Neff calls this the backdraft. So if you think of a house that's on fire, perhaps it has the fire has eaten up all the oxygen in the house. A firefighter isn't going to come and just like knock down the door and let this huge rush of air in because the fire's going to explode. So we have to be gentle in these practices so that we don't have this backdraft and we don't have this huge reaction. So it's not this big pendulum swing, it's incremental. And showing ourselves the self-compassion as we're working on the self-compassion. It really is this cyclical. So just I offer that to you, Gary. Barb, you've had your hand up. I'm sorry, I kept talking.
Okay. Um, in the first example that we were doing, um, I was talking to maybe a 3 or 4 year old child, me, and the 3 year old, let's say the 3 year old child was taken everywhere with her father, everywhere. And he was married, but the other guys were single and it didn't matter. I went everywhere with them, everywhere. And there was a like a Polish Falcons, and they set me at the bar, and I had pop or whatever. And I was talking to that's let's say that 3 year old.
Mhm.
And then my dad went into the service, and then he came home, and he forced me to eat some meat, that wasn't really soft. And I thought, what's going on? What happened? What happened to this dad that took me everywhere? And um, and that's what I was kind of talking to that little girl that felt
Mm.
uh, like abandoned in a way.
Yeah, thank you. That was very vulnerable. Thank you for sharing, Barbara. Beryl. Oh, you're muted, Beryl.
Sorry.
No problem.
As the first grandchild on both sides of my family, I was doted on by my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. There was no way I could feel not loved.
Mm. I love that. Thank you.
Mm.
All right. So as we close our time, is there a word or a phrase that stands out? And then I will close us with a poem to share. But what word or phrase stands out from our time tonight?
Be gentle with yourself.
Thank you. Love. Gail put in the chat. Comfort ye. Perfectly imperfect. Yes, Tish. Looking for my golden Buddha.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Look at your feelings. Oh, yeah. That's a good one, Susan. Thank you. As you all keep thinking, and I'm going to share our closing prayer, which is The Journey by Mary Oliver. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble. and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save.
Thank you.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
I'm so glad we had time tonight.
Mhm.
This is the work. We have to keep doing it. It doesn't go away. And the more those messages have been programmed into us, the more we have to keep pulling them out and working at it. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and people are still putting lovely things in the chats from what they'll take away. So thank you. And we'll see you next week for our final class, which is loving others. So that's another one that can go on for a very long time, but we'll condense it down to an hour. So, all right, blessings all, and I'll see you
Thank
next
you.
week.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Very good. Thank you.